In 1887, the governess Alice Morton arrived in the small English town of Littlewood to work at the Greystone estate. It was a grand yet gloomy mansion towering over the town, shrouded in thick fog. Its stone walls, covered in ivy, seemed weary from time, and its tall windows gazed at the world with empty eyes. Alice was young, intelligent, and eager for a quiet job. She did not believe in superstitions or old legends. But the moment she crossed the threshold of Greystone, she was enveloped by an unsettling feeling, as if she were being watched. The servants in the estate behaved unusually, silent, tense, avoiding her gaze. Even the master, Mr. Henry Harding, seemed uneasy, though he politely greeted her and showed her to her room. But what alarmed Alice the most was the corridor on the second floor. There, in the middle of the long, dark hall, hung a mirror, huge, in a massive frame, black as night. Its surface was too clean, too smooth, as if it were hiding something behind it. Alice noticed that none of the house's residents looked into it. The servants, passing by, lowered their eyes. The children avoided it. She asked Lily, the younger daughter of the Hardings, "Why does everyone avoid this mirror?" Lily whispered, "Someone lives there." Alice smiled, deciding it was just a child's fantasy. "You must have watched too many scary stories." But Lily shook her head. First night at the estate. On her first night at Greystone, Alice couldn't sleep. The estate creaked and groaned like a living creature. The wind howled through the chimneys, and the cold seeped through the thick walls. She lay in bed, but sleep did not come. Then, there was a faint sound from the corridor. Footsteps. Someone was walking in front of her door. Alice froze, listening. The footsteps were slow, uneven, as if someone barefoot was moving on the wooden floor. She cautiously got up, took a candle, and opened the door. The corridor was empty, but something made her hold her breath. The mirror. In its depths, there was something else. The candlelight did not reflect in it as it should have, as if the mirror was showing another corridor. Darker, longer, and there stood a figure, tall, motionless. Alice blinked, and it vanished. Only her own frightened reflection stared back at her from the smooth surface. She closed the door and clutched the blanket tightly. But all night, she heard whispers in the walls. The next morning, Alice woke up with a heavy head. She hadn't been able to sleep at all during the night. Every rustle, every faint breath of wind seemed like something more than just the sounds of an old house. She tried not to think about the mirror. Maybe it was just fatigue, or her imagination. All day long, she worked with the children, trying not to pay attention to the tension in the air. The servants spoke little, but when Alice accidentally asked about the mirror, everyone fell silent. One of the maids, a young girl named Mary, hesitantly said, "It's better not to touch it, miss. Never look into it after midnight." "Why?" Mary's face changed sharply, and she quickly retreated, not even waiting for an answer. Alice felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The next night was even worse. The clock in the far end of the house struck midnight. Alice lay in bed, but again heard the same footsteps as the night before. Slow, uneven, quiet, barefoot steps moving through the corridor. And then, whispering, a muffled, barely audible whisper that seemed to come from under the door. "Alice!" She gasped sharply, pressing her hand to her mouth. She couldn't be mistaken. Someone was calling her by name. The candle in the room began to flicker. It got cold, even though there was no wind or rain outside. She gathered all her courage, got up, and opened the door. The corridor was empty again, but the mirror, this time it was fogged up, as if someone was breathing on it from the other side. Alice took a step forward, not taking her eyes off the glass. And suddenly, letters began to appear on the mirror's surface. She watched as an invisible hand slowly wrote the words, "Your face is my face." The candlelight went out. Alice screamed. The servants rushed to her room, alarmed by her scream. "What happened?" The butler asked anxiously, looking around. Alice, still trembling, pointed to the mirror. There were words. Someone wrote them. Everyone looked at the glass. The mirror was clean. No writing, no trace. Only her own reflection, pale with fear. It was just a dream, miss, the maid muttered. "You imagined it." But Alice knew it was not a dream. Something lived on the other side of the mirror, and it was waiting. After that night, fear did not leave Alice. She no longer felt at home at the Greystone estate. Something was wrong. Every evening she bolted the door, but still felt them creak open. Every night she slept with a candle by her bed, but every morning she woke up in the dark. The candle was always out. But the worst was the mirror. Every time she passed by it, she felt a strange warmth on the back of her neck, as if someone was breathing on her. Sometimes she thought that the mirror reflected more than just the corridor, that there was a space that didn't exist in reality, that someone was standing there. The first real encounter. Another night came. Alice lay in bed, listening to the wind howling outside the window, and suddenly she heard another sound. A slow, cautious tapping on the glass. Not the window, the mirror. She froze. Tap, 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 as if someone was standing on the other side, trying to get her attention. The candle began to flicker, casting strange shadows on the walls. And then she heard it. "Let me in." The voice was deep, drawn out, as if it was being pulled from someone's throat by force. Alice slowly turned her head. The mirror. Its surface no longer reflected the room. It showed something else. Something black. A deep, impenetrable void. And in that void stood a silhouette. Tall, thin, with long arms reaching out to her. Alice couldn't scream. Her body wouldn't obey. The figure slowly approached. Its fingers touched the glass. And then, they passed through it. Alice finally managed to scream. The door burst open, and the servants rushed in. What happened? But when they looked at the mirror, there was only her own reflection. The servants urged her to leave the estate, but she couldn't. She couldn't just leave without knowing what was on the other side of the mirror. That night, something changed. The wind died down. There wasn't a single sound in the house. Alice lay, eyes wide open, and suddenly she realized something had changed in her room. The mirror, its surface opened like a door, and from the darkness, eyes stared at her, a faceless figure reaching out to her. "You belong to me." The voice echoed directly in her head. She tried to get up, but couldn't move. A force, cold as death, held her in place. The shadowy figure stepped into her room. Its fingers touched her skin. In the morning, the servants knocked on her door. Silence. They opened it. The room was empty. The bed was made, the window closed. But Alice Morton was gone. Mr. Harding ordered the mirror to be taken out and smashed. The servants took it to the yard. But when the hammer struck the glass, everyone heard a scream. And before the mirror shattered into pieces, everyone saw her. Alice. She stood inside the glass. Her eyes were wide open. Her hand reached out. And before she disappeared forever, her lips moved. Help. The mirror fragments were thrown into the river. But at night, when the water touched the glass, a faint silhouette appeared on it. And in the Greystone estate, in the dark corridors, a faint whisper can still be heard. And if you look into the mirror too long at night, maybe it will look back at you.